the screaming whine of a diving aircraft pierced the afternoon quiet over RAF Pembrey in South Wales on June 23, 1942. Duty pilot Sergeant Jeffries squinted skyward, his hand instinctively shielding his eyes from the summer sun. What he saw froze him in place. The unmistakable silhouette of a Focke-Wulf 190, Germany's deadliest fighter, performing a victory roll before lining up with their runway. No alarms had sounded, no warnings had come through. Yet here was the Luftwaffe's most feared predator, its black crosses boldly displayed on wings and fuselage, descending toward their airfield as casually as if returning from a training flight. As the aircraft touched down and taxied to a halt, Sergeant Jeffries grabbed the only weapon at hand, a signal flare pistol, and sprinted toward the German fighter. Oberleutnant Armin Faber, Gruppen Adjutant to the commander of the 3rd Fighter Gruppe of Jagdgeschwader II, opened his canopy and began removing his helmet, expecting to be greeted by fellow German officers. The blood drained from his face as he realized his catastrophic error. This wasn't the French coast. He had somehow crossed the Bristol Channel and delivered the Royal Air Force's most coveted prize right to their doorstep, an intact Focke-Wulf 190A3. No one at Pembrey could possibly comprehend what fate had just handed them. For months, Spitfire pilots had been returning with harrowing tales of a new German fighter that outmaneuvered and outgunned anything in the Allied arsenal. So desperate were the British to examine this aircraft that they had been planning a commando raid on a French airfield to steal one. Now, through a navigational blunder of historic proportions, the Luftwaffe's closely guarded secret sat unharmed on British soil. What British engineers would discover when examining this mechanical predator would finally explain why 371 RAF fighters had been lost in the past year alone, and would ultimately change the course of the air war over Europe. Armin Faber had never intended to make history with an act of inadvertent charity. Born in 1918 in Rhineland, Germany, Faber had grown up in the shadow of Germany's humiliating defeat in the First World War. Like many young men of his generation, he had been captivated by the promises of renewal and strength that emerged during the 1930s. Aviation represented modernity, power, and national redemption. The son of a clockmaker, Faber possessed a natural mechanical aptitude and keen attention to detail. Those qualities had served him well during pilot training, where instructors noted his methodical approach and precise flying technique. After earning his wings in 1940, he was assigned to Jagdgeschwader II, the Richthofen fighter wing, named after the famous Red Baron of the First World War. By 1942, Faber had risen to become Gruppen Adjutant, handling administrative duties for the unit's commander. Though not primarily a combat pilot, he occasionally flew operational missions when manpower was stretched thin. His position gave him a coveted assignment, flying the new Focke-Wulf 190, a fighter that had restored German air superiority over the English Channel since its introduction the previous autumn. On that fateful June afternoon, Faber had received special permission to join a mission with the 7th Staffel, responding to an Allied bombing raid on northern France. What began as a routine interception spiraled into an intense dogfight over the English Channel. In the swirling chaos of combat, Faber became separated from his formation and found himself pursued by a Czech pilot flying a Spitfire from No. 310 Squadron RAF. After executing a series of evasive maneuvers over Exeter, Faber pulled his aircraft into a climbing Immelmann turn, reversed direction into the blinding sun, and fired his remaining operational cannon. The Spitfire, piloted by Sergeant František Treitner, plummeted earthward, trailing smoke. The Czech pilot managed to bail out with relatively minor injuries, but Faber's victory came at a cost. He was now completely disoriented, low on fuel, and alone over enemy territory. In his confusion, Faber mistook the Bristol Channel for the English Channel. Flying north instead of south, He spotted RAF Pembry and, believing it to be a Luftwaffe field in occupied France, executed a textbook landing. His moment of relief evaporated when he found himself staring into the muzzle of Sergeant Jeffrey's flare gun. The 24-year-old German officer was so distraught upon realizing his mistake that he reportedly attempted suicide. After his capture, he was driven to RAF Fairwood Common for interrogation under the escort of Group Captain David Atcherley, who kept his service revolver trained on the German for the entire journey. When their car hit a pothole, the weapon accidentally discharged, narrowly missing Faber's head, a strange twist of fate that would have robbed the young pilot of witnessing the profound impact his navigational error would have on aerial warfare. As Faber began his journey to a prisoner-of-war camp in Canada, his aircraft was about to reveal secrets that would shake the foundations of British fighter design philosophy. The story of the Focke-Wulf 190 begins not with a fighter aircraft at all, but with a radical rethinking of what a modern combat aircraft could be. In the late 1930s, most European designers firmly believed that high-performance fighters required inline engines with their smaller frontal areas and reduced drag. Radial engines with their large, circular cross-section were considered suitable only for transport aircraft, bombers, and naval planes, where reliability outweighed aerodynamic concerns. Kurt Tank, technical director at the Focke-Wulf Company, challenged this conventional wisdom. A former World War I cavalry officer who had transitioned to infantry service, Tank understood from bitter experience that battlefield equipment needed to be robust above all else. When he turned his attention to fighter design, he prioritized survivability and firepower over theoretical performance metrics. The Messerschmitt 109 and the British Spitfire could both be summed up as very large engines on the front of the smallest possible airframe. In May, Tank later explained, these designs could be likened to racehorses. Given the right amount of pampering and easy course, they could outrun anything. But the moment the going became tough, they were liable to falter. Tank envisioned a fighter that could take punishment and keep flying, a butcher bird rather than a thoroughbred. While the Messerschmitt 109 was vulnerable to even minor coolant system damage, Tank's design would use an air-cooled radial engine that could continue operating even with significant battle damage. He had seen how a single bullet through a liquid cooling system could doom an otherwise intact fighter, and was determined to create an aircraft that could bring its pilot home despite taking severe hits. The challenge lay in maintaining performance while using a bulkier power plant. Tank and his team developed innovative cooling systems, including an engine-driven fan behind an oversized propeller spinner that forced air past the cylinders. The resulting design, the Focke-Wulf 190, first took flight in June 1939, just months before the outbreak of war. Early versions struggled with cooling problems, but by 1941, these issues had been largely resolved. In August of that year, the aircraft entered operational service with Jagdgeschwader 26 stationed in northern France. The impact was immediate and devastating. RAF pilots, accustomed to the relative parity between their Spitfire Mark V's and the Messerschmitt 109F, suddenly found themselves outclassed in nearly every performance metric. The Focke-Wulf's advantages were manifold: superior firepower from its combination of machine guns and cannon, better acceleration in most flight regimes, higher speeds at low and medium altitudes, and a blistering roll rate that allowed it to evade attacks with ease. Only in turning radius did the Spitfire retain an advantage, but Luftwaffe pilots simply avoided turning fights, using their superior speed and climb rate to dictate the terms of engagement. By spring 1942, the situation had grown dire. RAF Fighter Command's top-scoring ace, Wing Commander James Edgar "Johnny" Johnson, was forced to concede, "We could out-turn it, but you couldn't turn all day. As the number of 190s increased, so the depth of our penetrations decreased. They drove us back to the coast. This was the strategic context when Armin Faber inadvertently delivered his Focke-Wulf 190A3 to the British. The RAF had been losing the technological edge that had helped them survive the Battle of Britain. Now, they finally had the opportunity to understand exactly what they were facing. The captured fighter was initially given the designation MP-499 and markings in RAF colors. Given the aircraft's immense intelligence value, British authorities treated it with exceptional care. Group Captain Hugh Wilson, the Royal Aircraft Establishment's chief test pilot, was asked to fly it from Pembrey to Farnborough, but refused to guarantee he wouldn't crash the unfamiliar machine. Instead, the aircraft was partially dismantled and transported by road, a painstaking process that preserved every component in its original condition. Reassembled at the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough, the Focke-Wulf underwent meticulous examination beginning July 3, 1942. A team of engineers, designers, and metallurgists descended on the aircraft, measuring, testing, and documenting every aspect of its construction. What they discovered was both illuminating and concerning. The most obvious difference lay at the heart of the fighter, its BMW 801D2 radial engine. With 14 cylinders arranged in 2 rows of 7, this massive power plant displaced 41.8 liters and produced 1,700 horsepower for takeoff. Despite its size, German engineers had integrated it masterfully into the airframe, minimizing drag through careful cowling design. Eric Newton, lead engineer at R.A. Farnborough, recalled his first impression. We'd been thinking in terms of liquid-cooled engines for fighters for so long that seeing what the Germans had accomplished with a radial was genuinely shocking. The cooling system was a work of genius. An engine-driven fan behind the propeller forced air through carefully designed ducts, addressing the typical overheating problems of radial installations. The engine featured another innovation that stunned British engineers, the Commando Giret, an early form of what would today be called an engine management computer. This mechanical device automatically adjusted fuel mixture, prop pitch, ignition timing, and supercharger settings based on throttle position. Allied pilots had to manipulate multiple controls to achieve optimal engine performance. Luftwaffe pilots simply moved a single lever, allowing them to focus entirely on combat. It was at least 5 years ahead of anything we had, admitted Wilfred Freeman, Chief Executive Officer of the Ministry of Aircraft Production. A pilot in a high-stress combat situation had his workload dramatically reduced. One throttle movement and the entire engine configuration adjusted automatically. The significance cannot be overstated. The armament configuration revealed another area of German advantage. The Focke-Wulf carried 2 20mm MG 151 cannons in the wing roots, 2 MG-17 machine guns in the engine, cowling synchronized to fire through the propeller arc, and in most cases, 2 additional 20mm cannons in the outer wings. This concentrated firepower meant that even a brief hit could cripple or destroy an Allied aircraft. Beyond power and firepower, British engineers were struck by the Focke-Wulf's exceptional roll rate. The aircraft could switch directions almost instantly, a crucial advantage in combat that allowed German pilots to quickly reverse course and escape when at a disadvantage. The Spitfire, with its elliptical wing designed for stable turning, couldn't match this nimbleness. Flight testing confirmed what RAF pilots had reported. The Focke-Wulf was 25 to 35 miles per hour faster than the Spitfire Mark V at all altitudes below 20,000 feet, where most combat occurred. Its rate of climb was superior, particularly in the critical first few thousand feet after takeoff. Most worryingly, its acceleration in combat situations exceeded the Spitfires under nearly all conditions. After 10 days of intensive testing at Farnborough, the captured Focke-Wulf was transferred to the Air Fighting Development Unit at RAF Duxford for tactical assessment. There, it was pitted against Britain's newest fighter, the Spitfire Mark IX, in a series of mock combats that would determine whether this upgraded version could restore parity. Squadron leader James Mac MacArthur flew the Spitfire in these trials, and later wrote, "The 190 was formidable, responsive, stable as a gun platform, and viciously fast in a dive. But our Mark IX with the two-stage supercharged Merlin 61 engine could finally match it in climb and had the edge above 22,000 feet. The fight wasn't one-sided anymore. The test flights revealed crucial tactical information. The Focke-Wulf's performance began to drop off rapidly above 22,000 feet, while the Spitfire 9's improved supercharger allowed it to maintain power at higher altitudes. This discovery led to a fundamental shift in RAF tactics. When possible, engage the Focke-Wulfs at higher altitudes where the Spitfire held the advantage. The British also identified the FW-190's worst fighting heights, between 18,000 and 22,000 feet, and below 3,000 feet. This intelligence was rapidly disseminated to frontline squadrons, giving RAF pilots specific altitude ranges to seek or avoid when engaging the German fighters. While these findings provided some relief, they also made clear that only the newest Spitfires could hope to compete with the Focke-Wulf. The Mark IX had begun reaching squadrons in limited numbers just weeks before Faber's landing, and full deployment would take months. In the interim, RAF pilots flying older variants would continue to face a superior opponent. The examination of Faber's aircraft sparked an emergency response across British aviation. Designers and engineers worked around the clock to incorporate lessons learned from the German fighter. Some elements, like the advanced engine control system, couldn't be rapidly duplicated, but others could be addressed through modifications to existing aircraft and prioritization of new designs. Within days of the Focke-Wulf's arrival, production of the Spitfire Mark IX was accelerated dramatically. Powered by the Merlin 61 engine with a two-stage, two-speed supercharger, this variant could generate increased power at higher altitudes, directly addressing one of the key advantages of the BMW 801 engine. The Bristol Aeroplane Company, studying the Focke-Wulf's cooling system, incorporated similar principles into their designs for a new radial engine fighter. The result would eventually emerge as the Hawker Tempest II, which featured a Bristol Centaurus radial engine installed with ductwork inspired directly by the captured German aircraft. Beyond the technical responses, tactical adaptations spread throughout fighter command. Pilots were instructed to avoid prolonged dogfights with Focke-Wulfs, instead using hit-and-run tactics that minimized exposure to the German fighters' superior low-altitude performance. When forced to engage, they were taught to exploit the Spitfire's tighter turning radius while remaining vigilant for the Focke-Wulf's characteristic escape maneuver, a rapid roll followed by a steep dive that few Allied fighters could follow. The impact of these changes became evident within months. When Allied forces launched Operation Jubilee, the ill-fated raid on Dieppe, on August 19, 1942, the newly delivered Spitfire Mark IXs proved capable of challenging the Focke-Wulfs on more equal terms. Though the operation itself was a costly failure, with over 100 Allied aircraft lost, the aerial component demonstrated that the complete German dominance of early 1942 had begun to erode. By autumn, as more Mark IXs reached frontline squadrons, the balance of power in the air war gradually shifted. The Luftwaffe still possessed a formidable fighter, but the RAF now had a counter. German pilots, accustomed to near impunity, found themselves facing increasingly capable opposition. The technological race continued throughout the war, with both sides introducing improved variants of their premier fighters. The Focke-Wulf evolved through several models, culminating in the long-nosed D9 variant, powered by a Junkers Jumo inline engine rather than the BMW Radial. The Spitfire likewise underwent continuous development, with later marks featuring more powerful engines, improved armament, and refined aerodynamics. Yet the pivotal moment in this aerial chess match came when Oberleutnant Armin Faber landed at RAF Pembry. That single event accelerated British fighter development by months, if not years, and saved countless Allied lives by hastening the end of the Focke-Wulf's period of unchallenged superiority. As for Faber himself, his war effectively ended with his capture. Sent to a prisoner of war camp in Canada, he made at least one escape attempt before being repatriated to Germany shortly before the war's end due to health issues. His navigational error had inadvertently altered the course of the air war, though he would never fully comprehend the magnitude of his unintentional contribution to Allied victory. The Focke-Wulf he delivered remained in British hands for testing until January 1943, accumulating 29 documented flights. It was then partially dismantled for detailed engine performance tests at Farnborough before being struck off charge, military terminology for decommissioning, on September 18, 1943, and subsequently scrapped. Nothing remained of the aircraft until 1991, when an elderly German man visited the Shoreham Aircraft Museum in England. Introducing himself as Armin Faber, he presented the museum with his officer's dagger and pilot's badge, tangible connections to one of aviation history's most consequential navigational errors. Today, the museum displays the armored glass windscreen from his Focke-Wulf, along with fragments of the instrument panel, modest relics of an aircraft that changed the course of aerial warfare. The story of MP 499 reveals a fundamental truth about technological warfare. Advantages are often fleeting. The Focke-Wulf 190 represented a genuine breakthrough in fighter design, combining survivability, firepower, and performance in a package that temporarily overwhelmed Allied defenses. Yet the capture of a single example provided the knowledge needed to counter these innovations and restore balance to the skies over Europe. In the decades since World War II, the legend of the Butcher Bird has only grown among aviation enthusiasts. Kurt Tank's design is widely regarded as one of history's finest piston-engine fighters, perhaps the ultimate expression of the radial engine fighter concept. Its influence extended far beyond the war years, with features like its advanced cooling system and robust construction philosophy informing post-war aircraft design on both sides of the Iron Curtain. For the engineers who examined Faber's aircraft at Farnborough in those tense days of July 1942, the Focke-Wulf represented both a threat and an opportunity. Their ability to quickly understand its advantages, disseminate that knowledge, and implement countermeasures exemplifies the adaptability that ultimately proved decisive in the technological battle of World War II. When faced with superior enemy technology, they didn't panic or despair. They methodically dismantled, examined, tested, and learned. Then they applied those lessons with remarkable speed, transforming knowledge into action that saved lives and helped secure victory. In warfare, as in many human endeavors, the ability to learn from adversity often determines the ultimate outcome. The British response to the Focke-Wulf challenge demonstrates how technological setbacks can become the catalyst for innovation if one has the courage to face uncomfortable truths and the creativity to overcome them. Would you have recognized the Focke-Wulf's weaknesses so quickly? Would you have had the insight to see beyond its intimidating performance figures to identify the specific vulnerabilities that could be exploited? Share this story so others can appreciate how one pilot's navigational error and a team of brilliant engineers changed the course of history in the skies above Europe.